Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We're continuing our reading of Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. We're dealing with chapter 19 on avoiding contempt and hatred. Okay? It has proved to be quite unique, and I wanted to keep going along that vein. Let's begin. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Go ahead and listen to this as you are going about your day. You're doing your chores, you're washing dishes, cleaning the chicken coop, cleaning the fish tank, brushing your cat, trimming your dog's nails, whatever fun thing it is you're up to this day. Let's begin. Bismillah. Considering now, by contrast, the qualities of Commodus, Severus, Antonius, Caracalla, and Maximinus, you will find them extremely cruel and rapacious. So cruel and rapacious. To satisfy the soldiers, they did not spare any sort of injury which could be inflicted on the people. So here you see the discussion of how do you satiate the soldiers, and does satiating the soldiers inflict harm upon the common folk? And all except Severus had a sad end, for in Severus there was so much ability, virtue, that by keeping the soldiers his friends, even though the people were oppressed by him, he was always able to rule happily, for those abilities, virtue of his, made him so admirable in the sight of the soldiers and the people that the latter were, to some degree, astonished and stupefied, and the former respectful and satisfied. So here you see how important it is to have your soldiers like you. And because the deeds of this man were great for a new prince, I want to show briefly how well he knew how to use the characters of the fox and the lion, whose natures, as I say above, prince must imitate, knowing the indolence of the Emperor Julian. Severus persuaded his army, which he was leading in Slavonia, that it would be good to go to Rome to avenge the death of Pertinax. So avenge the death of Pertinax, who had been killed by the Praetorian guards, and under this pretext, without revealing his aspirations to the imperial rule, he moved his arms against Rome, and was in Italy before his departure was known. On his arrival in Rome, he was elected emperor by the Senate out of fear, and he had Julian killed. Well, that's brutal. So you can see the fear angle here. After this beginning, there remained two difficulties for Severus. If he wanted to make himself master of an entire empire, one in Asia, where Niger, head of the Asiatic armies, had himself named emperor, and the other in the west, where Albinus also aspired to imperial rule, and since he judged it dangerous to show himself to the enemy of both, he decided to attack Niger and to deceive Albinus. So we see attack and then deception. To the latter, he wrote that, having been elected emperor by the Senate, he wanted to share that dignity with him, and he sent him the title of Caesar, and by a resolution of the Senate made him his colleague, which things were accepted as true by Albinus. So the title of Caesar, okay, we're seeing that come into play as well. And by resolution of the Senate made him his colleague. But when Severus had defeated and killed Niger, pacified things in the east, and returned to Rome, he complained to the Senate that Albinus hardly acknowledged the benefits received from him, had treacherously sought to kill him, and for this it was necessary for him to go and punish Albinus's ingratitude. He then went to find him in France, and there he took away from him both his state and his life. Well, dang. So one minute he's like, hey, I'm gonna make you one of my guys. And he's like, hey, you know what? You haven't shown me enough gratitude. So I'm gonna come to little fruity France and murk you. I mean, France has been called France for quite a long time. It's quite remarkable. Whoever examines in detail, then, the actions of this man will find him most ferocious lion and most cunning fox, and will see him to have been feared and revered by everyone, and not hated by his armies, and will not marvel that he, a new man, should have been able to hold on to so great an empire, for his immense reputation always protected him from the hatred of the people and what they may have conceived because of his plundering. Okay, so we see here, not hated by the armies. Okay, feared and revered. So, the capacity to both fear and revere at the same time, you can be awe-inspired by someone's tenacity, by someone's magnanimity. Okay? But his son, Antonius, was also a man of the most excellent parts that made him admirable in the sight of the people and pleasing to the soldiers, for he was a military man, most capable of enduring every hardship, a despiser of all delicate foods and every other luxury, which made him loved by all the armies. So that's interesting. So frugality, not obsessed with vanities. Nevertheless, his ferocity and cruelty were so great, so unheard of, because of, after countless individual murders, he put to death a large part of the populace of Rome, and all that of Alexandria, that he came to be hated by all the world, and he began to be feared even by those whom he had about him, with the result that he was murdered by a centurion in the midst of his army. Whoa! So, he starts off real good, right? So, Severus has a son named Antonius, very common Roman name. And at first he's like, yeah, this guy's good, man. He's not super into materialism, but he starts getting more ferocious, and that ferocity leads to cruelty. And he transgresses the bounds. Then hatred comes in. The fear wasn't the awe-inspiring fear, but then turned into the fear that turns to hatred, which, if you recall, Machiavelli said it's better to be feared than loved, but you have to be feared without being hated and despised. Murdered by a centurion. I like their helmets. That red thing, the plume goes across. It's really cool. From this is to be noted that murders such as these, which result from the deliberation of a determined man, cannot be avoided by princes, since anyone who does not care about dying can harm him. So notice this. If someone doesn't care about dying, that makes them very dangerous. However, the prince need not fear such attacks much, since they are extremely rare. It is, yeah, that's a good point. It's rare that someone would want to throw away their life like that, but it's still quite possible, right? He must only guard against inflicting serious injury on anyone who serves him and whom he keeps about him in the service of the state, as Antonius had done, for he had shamefully put to death a brother of that centurion, and also threatened him every day, although he kept him in his bodyguard, which was a foolhardy decision, and one bound to cause ruin, as it just did. So, that's the catch. He was a moron who decided to keep a centurion in his personal guard, knowing that he murked that guy's brother and not recognizing that blood is thicker than water. So, Don't harm those who are in your service, as he said. You have to be very careful. But let us come to Commodus, for whom it would have been very easy to hold on to the empire, because he held it by hereditary right, being the son of Marcus. And it would have been sufficed for him merely to have followed in the steps of his father, and to have satisfied the soldiers and the people. But, being of cruel and bestial disposition, in order to be able to exercise his rapacity on the people, he turned to indulging the soldiers and making them licentious. So, indulging the soldiers. So, Marcus Aurelius, I believe he's talking about, he's the hero of Stoicism. I really liked his book quite a lot on meditations. And dang, you have a dad like that, and then his son turns out to be of the bestial disposition. On the other hand, by not maintaining his dignity, often descending into the theater to fight with the gladiators, and doing other things that were very base, and scarcely worthy of his imperial majesty, he became contemptible in the sight of the soldiers, and being hated on the one hand and despised on the other, he was conspired against and killed. Oh, so notice what he said here. So, to fight with the gladiators, at first you might be like, yeah, this guy's a man of the people. Instead of being a gladiator and rising up, he was somebody who, at that time, should have maintained the imperial majesty decorum, right? But apparently that was not something he wanted to do. So the soldiers began to feel contempt for him. Maybe this is because the gladiators secretly knew, you can't harm him because he'll have your whole family taken out, or, we can't really go full force against him, so, you'll be punished for winning, and then so you have to be a sort of plaything for his ego, and that's quite sad, isn't it? Okay, and so making the soldiers licentious, and so they felt he did not maintain his dignity, and if you're in an imperial position, they want you to maintain your dignity. The one thing remaining for us to do is to describe the traits of Maximinus. He was an extremely warlike man, and since the armies were disgusted with the softness of Alexander, which I have discussed above, he was elected to rule the empire after Alexander's death. He did not possess it for very long, since two things made him hated and despised. So remember, don't be hated. Don't be despised. The one was his very base origin, for he had formerly herded sheep in Thrace, which was well known everywhere, and made him an object of great scorn in everyone's sight. The other was that at the commencement of his rule he had deferred going to Rome to take possession of the imperial seat, and he had given himself a reputation for great cruelty, since he had so usually you think of a sheep herder as being softer, but here you see that wasn't the case. He's still cruel. He had, through his prefects, committed many cruelties in Rome and in other parts of the empire. Consequently, the whole world was moved by contempt because of the baseness of his blood, and by the hatred caused by fear of his ferocity. Okay, ferocity and its limits. So that first Africa rebelled, then the Senate with all the people of Rome, and then all of Italy conspired against him. To this was added his own army, besieging Aquileia and finding it difficult to capture. Disgusted by his cruelty, and fearing him less because they saw he had so many enemies, they murdered him. Okay, so notice the pattern here. They feared him, but they became brave once they saw how many enemies he actually had. A good example of that in fiction that I like to bring up is in The Walking Dead with the character Negan. The saviors, ironically, they have like that terrible name. They're not saviors at all. But they were known for being very, very cruel. And this, when Rick decided to do a rebellion, many became emboldened and decided to join in, while others stayed in fear. So there's those examples, but recall when Robert Baratheon said, "There are still those in the Seven Kingdoms who call me usurper." You know, pointing out how if Daenerys Targaryen showed up at the head of a Dothraki horde, that the great houses of Westeros might decide to join her, since they didn't really like Baratheon's rule, but he wasn't a bad guy. He was just a whoremonger and a drunkard. He wasn't cruel, but, you know, they might want to establish a Targaryen bloodline again. So you see, even in fiction, those examples reign true, and that's why some of cinema uses parts from history, because it touches a nerve, right? I do not want to speak of Heliogabalus, Macrinus, or Julian, who, being universally despised, were quickly eliminated. Okay, so these are cool names. I never heard of Heliogabalus, Macrinus. There's a lot of Julians, so I'm gonna have to see which one that was. But it would be cool to read about what they did. But I shall come to the conclusion of this discourse. And I say that the princes of our times have to deal less with this difficulty of satisfying the soldiers under their command by extraordinary means. For, although some consideration has to be given to them, nevertheless things are quickly resolved, since none of these princes have standing armies that are entrenched in the government and administration of provinces, as were the armies of the Roman Empire, and, therefore, if it was necessary to satisfy the soldiers then more than the people, that was because the soldiers could do more than the people. So who can do more? The soldiers or the people? That's a interesting one, because when you see dystopian types of examples, both fact and fiction, does the government who employs the soldiers, do they fear the people more or their own soldiers more? Do the soldiers love the people, or do they bind themselves to the banner of the government and what it represents? Right? What are they unified upon? Are the government and the people at odds? And what role does the soldiers play in all of that? Now, it is necessary for all princes except the Turk and the Sultan to satisfy the people more than the soldiers. For the people can do more than the soldiers can. Let's see how. I accept the Turk because he always keeps about him 12,000 infantry and 15,000 cavalry, on which depend the security and strength of his rule. And it is necessary for that lord, having set aside every other consideration, to keep them his friends. Similarly, since the realm of the Sultan is entirely in the hands of the soldiers, he too must keep them his friends, without any regard for the people. Okay, so the Sultan, the Turk, and you should note that this state of the Sultan is different from all other principalities, for it is similar to the Christian pontificate, which cannot be called either an hereditary principality or a new principality, because the sons of the sitting prince are not his heirs, and do not succeed him as rulers. But the one who does is elected to the rank by those who have the authority to do so, and as this system is ancient, it cannot be called a new principality, because in it there are none of those difficulties that exist in new ones. For although the prince really is new, the institutions of that state are old, and are set up to receive him as if he were their hereditary lord. But let us return to our subject. I say that whoever will consider the preceding discussion will see that either hatred or contempt has been the cause of ruin of those previously mentioned emperors. Okay, so hatred or contempt. So contempt, and then hatred, leading to ruin of those previously mentioned emperors. And he will recognize how it happens that, although some of them proceeded in one way and some in the opposite way, in each of those groups one man had a happy end and the others an unhappy one. Because for Pertinax and Alexander, being new princes, it was useless and harmful for them to try to imitate Marcus, who ruled the state by hereditary right, and similarly for Caracalla, Commodus, and Maximinus. It was fatal for them to imitate Severus, because they did not have sufficient ability virtue to follow in his footsteps. Thus a new prince in a new principality cannot imitate the deeds of Marcus, nor is it necessary for him to imitate those of Severus either, but he must take from Severus those qualities that are necessary to found his state, and from Marcus those that are useful and glorious for preserving a state that is already established and secure. So here we see establishing versus maintaining. A different type of precedent, isn't it? To build what has not been built is different than to maintain what is already built. Okay, now there's some cool notes here, and I want to read some of them. After Annibale Bentivogli was killed in 1445 by Battista Caneschi, Santi Bentivogli, the illegitimate son of Annibale's cousin, ruled until 1462, when Giovanni came of age. Giovanni was succeeded by his son, the present Annibale, who ruled for just 2 years, 1510 to 1512. Dang, man, it's like, when you hear something in the 14th century, you kind of forget like how long ago that was. The initial French parliament was that of Paris. It grew out of the king's court during the reign 1226-1270 of Louis IX. Provincial parliaments developed in and after the 15th century. These parliaments, unlike the one in England, were primarily judicial, not legislative bodies. Marcus the philosopher is Marcus Aurelius Antonius, who ruled from 161 to 180. Lucius Aelius Aurelius Commodus, his son. Now that is a freaking cool name. I love how these Latin names sound. Think about it. Marcus Aurelius Antonius, and then we have Lucius Aelius Aurelius Commodus. Notice here, Ius. See the ending, the IUS, and then all of those words have ending in us. That's really cool. His son was assassinated in 193. a year that saw no fewer than 4 emperors, since he was succeeded by Publius Helvius Pertinax, who ruled from January to March, by Marcus Didius Julianus, who ruled from March until he was assassinated, and finally by Septimius Severus. Imagine you have someone called Septimius, born in September, who died a natural death in 211. Well, at least we got a natural one in there. Severus' successor, Marcus Aurelius Antonius Caracalla, was assassinated in 217 by Marcus Opelius Macrinus. Woo, so many assassinations. And it's funny, people are like, Trump is literally Hitler. Trump is a dictator. And then you just look at like how brutal the past was with politics, you know. This is wild. Who took the throne but was himself put to death the next year. Heliogabalus Varius Avitus Bassianus followed him and was assassinated in 222. He was succeeded by Marcus Aurelius Severus Alexander, who ruled as Alexianus and was assassinated in 235. Finally, Alexianus was followed by Cassius Julius Verus Maximinus, who was killed in 238. It is noteworthy that the reign of Marcus Aurelius is seen as one of the high points of the Roman Empire, a view Machiavelli endorses in his discourses. The emperor he focuses on thus represents a steep decline after Marcus Aurelius's reign. Machiavelli's likely source for all this information is the Greek historian Herodian. Whose histories have been translated into Latin by the Italian humanist Angelo Poliziano. I mean, subhanAllah. You're like reading a list of assassinated. And today, like, if you were to, like look at the risk. Pardon me, I had an itch. Gotta get tissue. Like, it was a risk to go into politics before, right? It is like, hey man, you might just be eliminated. And now the quality of politicians is so low that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, someone who was a bartender, and has the brain cells of bird poop, it's like, wow, she's just a thirst-trapping, young, loud, wannabe celebrity, and she's always like freaking out, and she's emotionally a wreck. And that think of the decline, you know. You can say, oh, well, that's good. Politics has become just a sort of drama circus show instead of a violent affair. But I'd argue maybe those politicians, they ruled differently because there was that threat. Because there was this sort of high risk. You know? My parrot is dancing. He's dancing. Ditsy. He bobs his head and does a little dance. Machiavelli's reference to humors here is based on the idea of the state as a body politic. So, the state as a body politic. You'll hear that phrase often. And the citizens who inhabit it as these substances, the humors that make the body function. Okay, so this is interesting. The people are the humors. And, the people, let's write that down. The people are the humors. What was that? And think about how, when you're in a bad humor, you're like, oh boy, what are we gonna do now? In a good humor, it's like, hey now we're talking business. Marcus Aurelius was adopted as heir by the preceding emperor Antonius Pius. Oh, look at that. Slavonia is the modern Slovenia. Severus's army was actually not far from Vienna when he decided to move against Julian in Rome. Niger was Pessinus Niger, who was proclaimed emperor by the legions in Antioch in 193. He was beaten by Severus at Nicaea in that year and killed by his own soldiers. Albinus was Decius Claudius Septimius Albinus, head of the legions in Gaul. He was beaten by Severus in 198 and led to Rome, where he was executed. Whew. Look at that name. Decius Claudius Septimius Albinus. All the ones ending in us. IUS, IUS, IUS. Except for the last one, but they all end in US. The Turk is possibly Selim I, 1465-1520. The Sultan is the Sultan of Egypt, whose state was the Caliphate, established by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as an elective monarchy. Wait, hold on. What does he mean? Established by the Prophet Muhammad or just another person named Muhammad? As an elective monarchy. Well, since it's the 14th century, I think maybe a different Muhammad. Not a prophet, right? I don't get it. Okay. Because as an elective monarchy, in 1517, Selim captured Egypt and became its sultan. Okay, so do they mean like the caliphate established by the Prophet Muhammad system? Because a lot of people took the name after Prophet Muhammad, so that's why he should have a subnote there on what he means. Okay. Now we are in chapter 20, whether fortresses and many other things which are employed every day by princes are useful or not. Ooh, I want a fortress. Tell you what, I want a fortress, and then I want the people who deliver the packages to have to walk across a giant moat where there's a drawbridge, and they walk across, and there's these giant flaming torches and guards with crossbows. What do you want? And they have to go like chung chung chung. Hello, and someone opens like a mini window. What do you want? Here to deliver the Amazon package. Be nice. I want a fortress. Build me a fortress. Some princes, in order to hold on to their states securely, have disarmed their subjects. Ooh. Joe Biden says what? Liberals say what? They fear the people. To hold on to their states securely, you have to disarm the people. Now, they want to have security over the people because why? Second Amendment. America. Some others have kept their subject lands divided. Some have nourished hostilities against themselves. Some others have devoted themselves to winning over those who were suspect at the start of their rule. So to win over your former enemies, people who are like, I don't really trust you, and you have to win their favor, so they make everything smooth, don't cause a ruckus. Some have constructed fortresses. Some have torn them down and destroyed them. Oh, so you either take them over or destroy them. And although a definite judgment cannot be given about all these things, without going into the particular details about those states in which some such deliberation had to be made, nevertheless I will speak in it as general a way as the subject matter itself will allow. The only time a fortress didn't work was when the dragons burned Harrenhal. It has never been the case, then, that a new prince has disarmed his subjects. On the contrary, when he found them disarmed, he has always armed them. For when they are armed, those arms become yours. Those who were suspect to you become loyal, and those who were loyal remain so, and from being subjects, make themselves your partisans. Ooh, liberals, take away the guns. How many countries now disarm their population? Think about that. But some people have always said that it would be difficult to invade America with a ground game because of how much weapons we have. It would be very hard to take us over with a ground game. Because, people were afraid of firearms. They were like, hey, want to get rowdy? We're gonna get rowdy in here. The problem is, in order to convince the population to give up their own security measures against the oppression of the state and from the oppression of criminals and local mafias, they had to say, okay, there's all these people pushed up on SSRIs, serotonin reuptake inhibitors. I think is how that word goes, that phrase. And they're loony, and there's all these crackheads, and so we have to use these junkies and these mentally ill people, and we have to psyop the masses so that they're so full of fear that they hand over everything to make it stop. So, like, for example, you could protect the schools very easily. In Philadelphia, where I went to school, there was a TSA-style security checkpoint. So we had to wear color-coded uniforms. Okay. Our name tag around our necks has a picture, so they verify we're actually a student. And every student has to line up. You have to go through a metal detector. Okay. They scan you, and then you have to take off your belt, take off your shoes, put your backpack, everything through a scanner, and there's someone there, and they're looking inside of your backpack. What's there? Okay. And the fences were tall. They had barbed wire on the top, and some of the door handles, were not there for the outside. But there was security guards, school police that would walk the halls, during classes. So it was very different. And your cell phone was handed in at the beginning of school. So back in those days, you had the flip phones, and I remember they put a sticker on the back, your name, and then it goes in the principal's office in a safe thing. And after school, you wait to have it given to you. So they're like, oh, so what's your name? So and so. What is the color of the phone? Make it faster. Oh, is this okay? Okay. And they look on the back. They see your school ID. Here's your phone back. Right. One of the most secure ways in the most dangerous neighborhoods, and there was rarely any fights. I mean, I still beat up this crazy chick, but it was worth it. But in other schools where I fought, because I was expelled from several schools for fighting, there was no real security, and there was one school cop who was always in his office, and you could do whatever the hell you wanted. Even though they were nicer schools with better food, and they had soccer teams, and they were good schools, but just boring ass security. So my point is that you can make the schools safer with just instituting basic security measures. People don't want to do that, but instead the government, who hates us, who despises us, allows those crimes to continue by not protecting the schools, and liberals do not want teachers armed. So they don't want teachers to be armed in schools to protect against a shooter, and they don't want to install basic security, but they do want your right to own a firearm to be so taken away that there's like a thorn on the ground. I keep sitting on it. They want your basic right to security to be taken from you, to be severely revoked. And so that's a problem. That is a big problem. And it's so important for people to recognize that your country becomes stronger when the people are moral and have a firearm. Here you can kind of see his point, and he was ahead of his time in that regard. But think about how anybody could own a sword back in the day. And they say, oh yeah, well, swords aren't automatic weapons now, are they? But at the same time, you have to look at it like, hey, we have different kinds of evil people today, and citizens have a right to defend themselves. If you go through my security mindset videos, you'll see my point. So, I do like his point that when the people are armed, those arms become yours. I agree with that. And since all subjects cannot be armed, when the ones whom you do arm receive benefits, you can deal more securely with the others. And this difference in treatment that the armed ones recognize toward themselves makes them feel more obligated to you. So making people feel obligated to you, the others excuse you, judging it necessary that those who face more danger and have more responsibilities get greater rewards. But when you disarm them, you begin to offend them. Yes. And you show that you distrust them, either because of their cowardice or lack of loyalty. And both of these judgments generate hatred against you. Yes, that's why a lot of people who are, like, a lot of moms, I think more and more now, like, I'll give you an example. The riots of BLM got so bad that even liberals went to rush to get firearms, but they realized all their legislation, which I kind of understand a bit. You want to have background checks and stuff. I don't have a problem with that. Some argue that's an infringement, but the point is that they thought it was so easy to go get a firearm, when in reality, it isn't. And yes, there are loopholes and there are shady people on the black market, but when you go into a reputable, established business who takes their job seriously, they can refuse to sell you an item, and so you make it harder. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that these women who had voted against the Second Amendment in the past realized how terrified they were of rioting and how their communities were being torched and police did nothing. So they believed in the myth that the government's going to be your superhero. In reality, they saw police stand down and that they're up to defend themselves, and then they see their children afraid in their beds as rioters are outside. And all of a sudden, realness kicks in and the society bubble pops, and you realize you're in a state of war and survival. And that's really what Earth is. Civility is very temporary and very fragile. Okay? And yet those same people like watching movies and shows where action movies are cool because they have weapons. Right? So you see the basic common sense point that firearms keep people in check. Now, if you want people to stop misusing firearms, ban rap music, certain types of rap music, because rap is kind of a poetry. But don't allow people like Tekashi 6ix9ine and others to have their music on public platforms. Stop promoting it in the algorithm, You can amplify proper gun usage and de-amplify, bad gun usage. But again, like I said, they have an agenda to ban guns from the American people in general. And this generates hatred towards the government. And shows that the government would have us be sitting ducks for criminals and to be more vulnerable to the abuse of the government. So there's a very interesting conversation. Think of that viral clip Alex Jones did with Piers Morgan. 1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms. Now, Alex Jones could be right about some things and off his rocker about a lot of things. But the point is when everyone saw that, we remembered who exactly the government is. And then you look at England, they ban firearms, but they're still shankings. And now they're like, we need to take away knives. Imagine, you're trying to cut a rib roast and you can't have one, and you gotta register it with the state or something. The government will never stop taking control, and then with the inventions of AI and whatnot, and their DARPA dogs, they won't even let you have a knife to cut food with, but the government gets to have all sorts of horrific killing machines. And if you don't have a firearm, you can't defend yourself against criminals and against the wickedness of governments. It's really quite fascinating to think about. So here's a great point. And because you cannot remain unarmed, you are obliged to turn to a mercenary army whose character was discussed above. And even if it were good, it could not be so strong that it could defend you from powerful enemies and suspect subjects. So mercenary armies. So he's pointing out here that, okay, if you arm your people, they literally are gonna defend their physical territories. They're gonna benefit you. Because good people, okay, they're like mowing your lawn, all of a sudden things are going off. Some people will obviously run, others will be like, stand lock and load, and they're just gonna spray too. So people that love their communities aren't gonna watch as criminals come in and pillage and burn and hurt women and children and the elderly. Good men and good women aren't just gonna sit there and be like, oh, we're liberals, we're pacifists, so tread on us, baby. No, that's not gonna happen. So it literally benefits the government that good people are able to put down criminals. But if you take away all the weapons, and the criminals will always have access to some strong firepower. Okay, it's always going to be available for them. Okay, now you have your good citizens being murked by the hundreds, by the thousands, and your own soldiers. They cripple you. You don't have the manpower to fight back. Right? You're outgunned. You're outmanned. So he has a point here that if you hire a mercenary army, it's not going to be enough as your own people being armed, because they're going to fight for the love of their communities. Mercenaries going to fight for, are we going to get paid? That's their goal. They sell swords. They sell their swords, as they say. Okay, their interest is in, am I going to win this fight? Who's going to pay me more? And with mercenaries, they get offered a better price, they're going to go with someone else. So a nation that depends on a mercenary army is not the same as a nation that depends on its people. Right? He's pointing out a lot of things here for us. But as I have said, a new prince in the new principality has always ordered that his state should be armed. Histories are full of the examples. But when a prince acquires a new state, which, like a member, is attached to his old one, then it is necessary to disarm that state, except for those who, when you are acquiring it, were your partisans, and even those, when time and opportunity serve, must be made weak and effeminate. Ooh. What did he just say? Be made weak and effeminate. Make them effeminate in order to conquer them. That it is necessary to arrange things so that all the armed power of your state is concentrated in your own soldiers who live near you in your original state. Ain't that the truth? So basically, disarm those who you need and arm those who you need. Our forefathers and those who were considered wise used to say that it was necessary to hold Pistoia by means of factions, and Pisa by means of fortresses. And, for this purpose, they neutered disagreements in some of their subject towns in order to hold on to them more easily. In those times, when Italy had, to a certain degree, a balance of power, this wisdom may have served well, but I do not believe it can be as a rule today, for I do not believe that factions have ever done any good. Oh, look at that. That reminds me of the Federalist Papers. That's interesting. What is that called today? Cloud and pivot, balkanization. These are very powerful terms. See, when you start reading the classics, you can see the threads of reasoning across the spectrum, and you can examine how they thought what they thought and the wisdom. They don't teach you this stuff until you're kind of old. But imagine if kids were learning about the art of politics like this instead of what your pronouns are and all the other nonsense. The Venetians... Oh, wait, here we go. On the contrary, when the enemy approaches, divided cities will necessarily be lost immediately, for the weaker party always attaches itself to the forces outside, and the other will not be able to hold out. United we stand, divided we fall. You see how some of these phrases we hear over the years, they reign true? It's because it is true, right? Divided cities, the Union. Why was the United States trying to be called the Federal Union? The states, we cannot be factions against one another. We must be the United States of America. The Venetians, moved, as I believe, by the reasons stated above, nourished the Guelph and Ghibelline factions in their subject cities, and, although they never allowed them to reach the point of shedding blood, nevertheless they nourished this dissension among them, so that those citizens, being occupied with those disagreements of theirs, were not united against them. So notice this. Okay, this is smart. So the Guelph and the Ghibelline factions, the subject cities, so they weren't allowed to reach a point of shedding blood, but nourishing the dissension made it so that their disagreements prevented them from uniting and working against those who were trying to undermine them. Do you see what he's saying? So don't let them murk one another, but keep them utterly argumentative, despised, alienated, combative, no harmony. Just keep them going at each other. That's what happens today in America. That's why if you think about how a president is supposed to unite the left and the right, but we're more divided now. Well, we don't have a civil war. You could say in the Civil War people were really divided because they were actually murking people. But I would say that America, we have people who are too busy to see the division. But if you see the trajectory and how making children eunuchs under a certain banner and other things has really divided a lot, you know. Especially the division between men and women because of feminism, you know. That's a strong one. As has been seen, this did not then turn out to their advantage, because after the defeat at Vaila, one of those factions immediately took courage and seized the entire state from them. Such methods, therefore, argue weakness in a prince, for in a strong principality, such divisions will never be permitted. So here we see, strong principality, such divisions will not be permitted. So I remember Joe Biden said that Xi Jinping of China wants China to be a strong area, a united China, and that by allowing Muslims to exist, that this would essentially, by what he was implying, would undermine their society, and that the communist philosophy everyone must adopt and be a communist and obey the communist rule. So they oppress religion because they are profitable only in time of peace, enabling one by means of them to manage one's subjects more easily. But when war comes, such a procedure reveals itself faultiness. Okay, so here he's pointing out the factions in times of peace, they're producing for you, but when it comes time to war, you need, like, hey, we need some aid, we need some allies, like, come help us. They're like, no, we hate those people. Destroy them. And if you think about it, others have said that California should be separated off, and Bill Maher will say stuff like, oh, the flyover states. The Bible Belt is the flyover states. We're the coastal elite. Like, you see that there's the hatred of smug, aristocratic, even city dwellers versus family values, rural folk. And then you see the people who spend time in nature, around actual life, and those who are in congested, natureless, metal-filled cities with lots of homeless and drug addicts. It's just a different mindset in how they're like, we don't have the same values. We're not upon the same goal. We don't view life the same way. I'm not going to help you. That's why people be like, we're all humans. You have to love humanity. And it's like, I save your life so that you can do what to me the next day. You know, it's interesting. It's really noticeable how, like, online you'll see how people, they just want more and more censorship. And as you have more and more censorship, you have this sort of unvented hatred that doesn't really get to test itself against the waters and just dwell in the realm of theory. And so, in times of war, people will be like, what do you believe in? I'm not fighting alongside you. We don't have the same goal. Oh, but we live here. Yeah, but maybe that new person who's conquering us will do better. You know, who knows? So there's something to think about that. It really is. Without doubt, princes become great when they overcome the difficulties and obstacles that confront them, and therefore fortune, especially when she wants to make a new prince great, someone who has more need of acquiring prestige than does an hereditary prince. That's a good point. So if you acquired your position through merit, not nepotism, not bloodline, there's a different type of prestige there. Like, you have a bloodline, you gotta live up to it. You know, oh, you're so-and-so's son. Like, look at Michaela Peterson. Famous because of her daddy, not because of her skills, you know? Because she worked for it. It was handed to her. A thirst-trapping puppet, you know? But if you rose up yourself, that's a different type of prestigiousness. Interesting. Acquiring prestige then does an hereditary prince, causes enemies to appear for him, and has them undertake campaigns against him, so that he may have cause to overcome them, and to climb up higher on the ladder which his enemies have brought him. Your own enemies bringing you the ladder. Think about that. Bring me my ladder, so my client chaos is a ladder. Therefore, many think that a wise prince, when he has the opportunity, should cunningly nourish such hostility, so that through its suppression his greatness will be augmented. So, fostering some hostility so that you can shine, like the drama makers. Okay, so what would this be in right now today? Would be contrarian content creators. So they gotta pick fights with everybody in order to climb up. Right? That's one strategy. I don't do that. When I disagree with someone, it's genuine. But this strategy does work. And Vosh was part of that as well. Everyone's a Nazi. I remember his videos just constantly attacking Ben Shapiro, and Ben Shapiro deserves to be mocked. But that worked for him because he would attack, and then come up. And so, and there's other content creators as well who do this, but it's this strategy where it's like, okay, you've gotten a certain level, you need attention, you need eyeballs, so you pick fights, and then you try to win. So, it's fascinating. I don't think that's sustainable, because then you make a lot of enemies, you know, because then it's like, oh, who now are you going after? You're always burning bridges, like, you can't stop picking fights for relevance, you know. Also, there's people in the Taoist scene who do that as well. They're just like, this person's wrong, this person's wrong, this person's wrong, this person's wrong, and the only way they can shine is, you know, by having these campaigns against people. Princes, and especially those who are new, have found more loyalty and more usefulness in those men who, at the beginning of their rule, were considered suspect than in those whom, at the beginning, they trusted. Pandolfo Petrucci, Prince of Siena, ruled his state. Oh, I never heard of him. So, Pandolfo Petrucci, Prince of Siena, ruled his state more with those whom he suspected than with others. But of this, one cannot speak in general terms, as it varies according to the situation. I will only say this: the prince will always win over those men with the greatest ease who had been his enemies at the founding of the principality, but who are the sort who need his support in order to maintain themselves, and they will be all the more compelled to serve him loyally, in that they recognize how really necessary it is for them to cancel by their deeds the bad opinions he had of them. And thus the prince always gets greater use out of them than out of those who, in serving him from positions of too much security, neglect his affairs. Fascinating. Wow. A great read. I really do like how he said, must be made weak and effeminate. Because you wanna get into the rabbit hole, make the men weak and effeminate, now you can really ruin people. And liberals don't want to accept that, you know. They really hate that. But at the same time, they think they can control, like, how do you get out of that system of the strong ruling? It's really something to look at. You know, they hate gender roles, and they hate masculinity and true femininity, and they blend and create new Frankensteins. But here we see that there is a point to all of it in the end. And I remember he talked about nourishing the dissension among them so that there's too many disagreements and they won't unite again. Like, they won't unite, you know. That's so potent. I believe so I'm very fuzzy on it, but I do recall how that was one angle that was used in the Native American tribes, okay, when they tried to have confederations, and then they would single out one of the tribes of that confederation, and then, like, oh, we'll give you whiskey, we'll give you furs, we'll trade with you, we'll give you everything you need. Then they go to the next group and the next group, and they can slowly, okay, take over land, you know, erode and corrupt. And no one made the natives become alcoholic. They chose it. But they had different types of intoxicants, this is true, but brewed whiskey, you know, that just hits different. You know, whiskey is like, boom, like, whoa. So, that type of, kind of like how fentanyl is today. You can make America weak by the fentanyl. I just read a news story today that 2 toddlers in different news stories got a hold of their mom's fentanyl, and they passed away. And you can blame China, you can blame Mexico, but at the end of the day, the American people choose drugs. They love drugs. And intoxicants is as American as apple pie. Liberals want to legalize, tax, and regulate all drugs. They want safe injection sites. So they literally want people to have places where they can go and just get high all day, you know, and then just smoke as much crystal meth as you want till your teeth fall out. Liberal goals. Atheist utopia. With no consideration to, you know, how those people become a menace to society in general. And libertarians will say, well, you know, you're okay to do that as long as you're not hurting one else, but you're hurting your parents by smoking all those drugs. You're hurting your children by smoking all those drugs. And you're dishonoring yourself before your maker. And so drugs are a weapon. If you think of, in the Philippines, Duterte, when he was leader, look up this interview, there's a famous quote I love where he was like saying, "You bring drugs into my country, I go to kill you." It was something like that, where Duterte legalized the murking of those who sell and use drugs. And people were like, "Oh, stop it, how could you do that?" But if you think about it, he was trying to save his country, you know? He was trying to... And then if you look in Afghanistan, they started giving opium to the people, and then they tried to make them drug addicts. So, America has been weakened by drugs and effeminate men. And when men get high, they do more, like, hedonistic, perverted things. Okay? And this is just the fact. Because there's, like, I don't want to keep it this minimalistic, but they say there's 2 types of people when they get high. The one who chills and the one who becomes a deeply dangerous pervert. And if you are 2 men and you were the chill guy and the other one's the pervert, he's going to wait for you to pass out. He's going to R-word you. Okay? And so you have to be very careful. And then the one who gets R-worded, his energy is shifted. And he feels like less of a man. And you hear their testimonies and they feel very effeminate. and they got turned out and they feel very strange. And so you can make somebody very weak and less strong through trauma. You know, there's certain levels of trauma that will make you stronger, but there's definitely some particular genres that it sticks in you, and it's like it doesn't let you grow. It's really bad. And so drugs are a way to make your population effeminate and weak, and it's a form of warfare. And while people are high being schizophrenic, and people are working hard and they see inflation's high, and there's these different values, you just can't get along. And so factions, this causes a lot of dissension. You want to have the competition of ideas, but there's a art to it, there's a finesse to it. So it's a great section, absolutely wonderful section, because we get to see our own ideas, we get to see what he's talking about, and he does have a point. And I think this is testament to why his work has survived for this long, and I hope you enjoyed. If you'd like to support my work and see more things that I write, you can go to www.subscribestar.com/MilahanArtGuy. I hope to see you there.